look back at the week that was the final sitting week of Parliament. Joining me on our panel this morning, the former Howard Government Minister Peter Reith and the Labor Alliance strategist Bruce Hawker. Good morning to both of you and thanks for joining us.
Morning.
Let's start with you, Peter Reith. Did either side emerge as the winner this week, would you think? Both seem to suffer a few bruises along the way.
Well, I suppose it's partly a football game, if you like, or a cricket game, but I mean, it's not. And, you know, winners and losers in this situation perhaps doesn't quite give it the tone that it should have. I think the fact is, though, that coming out of the whole, 4 days and the attacks on Gillard, her reputation for trustworthiness has taken another dive and, with very good reason and with facts to back it up. So I don't think it's been good for her. For the opposition, well, in a situation like this, you hand it out and you take it a bit as well, but I think they've done pretty well, actually. I think Julie Bishop, she's taken a hell of a lot of battering from the government as a means of trying to keep her quiet, but actually I think she's had a very good week and a very strong one. So, yeah, I'd give it slightly to the opposition, but I don't really like adding it up as pluses and minuses.
Peter Reith, we have seen, of course, Labor comparing this whole saga to the Godwin-Gretsch affair, pointing out that Malcolm Turnbull, it's one of the reasons he lost his job over that whole thing. And we've seen the comparisons, the government saying, well, Tony Abbott or Julie Bishop should go as well as a result of this one. Do you think there was some overreaching here in this matter this week?
No, and anyway, who remembers Godwin-Gretsch? I certainly don't.
Even when the opposition accused the Prime Minister of breaking the law? Specifically?
Well, the fact is that she put up a case on behalf of Wilson and Blewett to the Western Australian Commissioner and respective incorporations, and what she told them wasn't right. And as Joe Hockey said this morning, this is an illegal proposition. Now, the lawyers can fight about what's legal and what's illegal, what's a proper description of it. But the fact is she misled the WA Commission. She herself called the thing a slush fund, and then they put the thing up as based on, trying to assist safety issues for workers, and of course it had nothing to do with that. So, no, she's been caught red-handed. She said that she didn't know that there was any such correspondence in existence, and of course at the end of the week she gets hit with it. So, no, the fact is what the coalition's done is what the opposition ought to do, which is bring governments to account, bring ministers and prime ministers to account. The Labor Party doesn't like it. They'll say absolutely anything. They'll threaten to regulate the press because the government doesn't like, being picked up by the press. But the fact is the press have done what they should have, and so has the coalition.
Bruce Hawker, could Julia Gillard have taken the air out of this story earlier in the week by answering some of these questions the opposition did put to her in question time? We know she had that long news conference, but when it came to, especially earlier in the week, the questions put to the Prime Minister from Julie Bishop, there was a lot of avoiding from the Prime Minister on some of those specific questions, especially about that letter to that WA Government department.
Yeah, I don't think there was ever any real prospect that the opposition was going to be deterred in the course that it ultimately took. We did see a very lengthy press conference by Julia Gillard at the beginning of the week where she gave people plenty of opportunity to ask any number of questions that they wanted, and she dealt with those. And then we saw 4 days of questioning largely by Julie Bishop, which led in the end, I think, to a stalemate. Was this a great week in Parliament for either side? I think not. I think when they write the history of this period in our history, that they certainly won't be saying, surely this was their finest hour. I think they'll be saying something quite different about it, that it was a very tough and hard week for both sides of politics, where the opposition was desperate to try to get a hit on the Prime Minister. When you throw mud, obviously some of it's going to stick, but did at the end of the day they really make serious inroads? I suspect not.
Bruce, how much of that mud do you think is going to stick? What sort of impacts do you think we'll see flowing on in terms of the voters' view on all of this when it comes to the next round of polls, for example? Obviously, this whole thing has been feeding into the opposition's theme that this is a Prime Minister who's untrustworthy, who doesn't have the sort of level of credibility we should expect from a Prime Minister.
Look, I think when you have 40 questions directed at the Prime Minister about something that happened admittedly 20 years ago, then there is going to be some impact. Exactly how much, I don't know. But I suspect, though, that it will be short-term rather than long-term. You see, the real problem that the opposition's grappled with throughout this period, and I think it's damaged Tony Abbott and certainly Julie Bishop to a certain extent, is that they have never been able to come up with smoking gun evidence that she did anything which implicated her in, in this whole awful affair involving Wilson and Blewett. All we can say at the end of the day is that she was a solicitor acting on instruction. So I think, though, that they will, it will have an effect. I think we'll see some downside, and I think in the government ranks they would be expecting something along those lines. You don't have that sort of an onslaught without it having some effect on the credibility of and the impressions that the public have of the government. But I think it'll be reasonably short-lived.
Peter Reith, we saw the opposition calling for the Prime Minister to quit yesterday. It's a call that they've made on numerous occasions throughout the year, but here we are. Parliament's over for the year. So many commentators suggested that Prime Minister wouldn't last until Christmas. Do you give her any credit for sticking around in the face of a lot of drama and pressure we've seen this year on a number of different issues?
Well, the fact that she's, been done everything she can to keep her job is hardly a credit to her. I mean, look at Australia's general situation. We ought to be seeing some real reforms in workplace relations. The fiscal policy situation is basically in tatters. I mean, quite frankly, I think from everybody's point of view, it'd be good if we had an early election. And February, March would suit the situation, if you ask me. But no, I don't think she gets any credit out of this. And look, you've got to look at it, take a step back. I mean, she was a solicitor in an important Labor firm, and basically as a result of her behaviour, she left the firm. The firm had to bring in separate lawyers to examine what had happened, and then they had to pass all their files over to Maurice Blackburn. Now, the whole thing was pretty shonky, quite frankly, from start to finish. And when a partner has to be interrogated and then they keep a transcript of what was said, and they're still talking about it because they're unhappy about it nearly 20 years later, well, it just goes to show you that's the, that is a mark of the character of the Prime Minister, and that's not a very happy one. So, but look, we're going to start 2013. It'll be the usual bun fight right from the word go. Probably won't let up much over January. I think January holidays will be off limits for most of them. I think they'll all be pretty well hard at it all through the period.
Bruce Hawker, we all remember your role in the Rudd v Gillard leadership spill, but do you think now that the Prime Minister's made it to Christmas, she will last all the way to the next election? I
think so. I think the success of the government in many ways in recent months, and it's a relative success, if you've got to say, coming off a very low number in the early and mid months of the year, has been, I think, in significant part due to the unpopularity of Tony Abbott. I think it's a strange sort of political dynamic that's operating at the moment in a funny sort of a way. Abbott and Gillard both sort of need each other. I think the last thing we would want to see on the Labor side would be a change of leader away from Tony Abbott to someone like Malcolm Turnbull. Now, I'm sure Peter will say that would never happen, but we have seen funny things happen in politics in the past when defeat looked like being snatched from the jaws of victory. So I think they will stick with her, but there are all sorts of twists and turns which can happen along the way, which are going to affect the next several months in politics. And I think the crown sits rather uneasy on Tony Abbott's head at the moment. No one in the Liberal Party could be very happy with his performance. I'm sure that people like Peter Reith wouldn't be happy with his failure to take on traditional Liberal issues like workplace reform. And he's a big spending opposition leader as well. There's a lot of opportunity for Labor to go after him, and I think there's a lot of people inside the Liberal Party who are very disaffected with his leadership at the moment.
Peter, keen for your view on that.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, Bruce made the point himself. He said, can they snatch defeat from victory? I mean, the fact of the matter is that as the year ends, Abbott's well and truly on top of the political contest. He's ahead in the polls, and quite frankly, in the end, that's what's going to count. I'm not going to say what the poll will be at the final, judgment day when we get to an election. But, we've seen this before in Australian politics. when a party has an ascendancy of the sort that the coalition has had, I think it reflects that the public has pretty well made up their mind about Julia Gillard. I think they made it up 12 months ago, and sure, Bruce is right. I mean, they picked up a few points in the last, 3 or 4 months, but I mean, the basic view about Julia Gillard, I don't think is about to improve in any way, and quite frankly, why would it when you hear, they're all saying she hasn't done anything wrong. Well, actually, there was a piece of paper this week that showed that she had, in black and white. So, the public they're not mugs, and Abbott's still on track to win.
Bruce, we heard Peter raise the prospect of this election next year. Of course, we're going to enter into this year now where there's this constant guessing game going on about when the election's going to be held. Peter seemed to be suggesting he thinks it's going to be earlier in the year rather than later. As a Labor strategist, what would you be advising the Prime Minister to do when it comes to election timing? Do you think this theory that they'll try to go before the May budget is a valid one?
Well, on the numbers at the moment, it's nonsense. If we went into an election right now, we would lose, and everybody knows that, and we would lose in seats in Western Sydney as well. The government's got a lot of work to do yet before it can be in a position to seriously consider an election. And I think that's what the hard heads inside the party would be thinking right now. So we can talk about early election scenarios. I don't think the government wants one. I don't really think Tony Abbott particularly wants one either at the moment. But I think we will see the next year go pretty much full term. I think we'll probably see an election in sometime between August and October. I think they're the likely timing for the election. It just doesn't make sense for them to go right now. They've still got a long way to go before they can say that they're in any way seriously competitive. But that doesn't mean that the Liberal Party would be feeling very happy about Tony Abbott's performance right now, because I think the pact that he did with the Liberal Party was to say, I don't mind driving my personal popularity down as long as I can drive the government's right down. And he did that for a time, and in recent times that started to look very shaky, and I think he would be worried over the coming months. He's really got to get out there and start developing policy, I've got to say, and every day that he delays that and delays rolling stuff out, I think it's another day when he should feel uncertain about his leadership.
Well, Tony Abbott was very keen to project this positive image this week on a number of policy fronts. We'll look at those just after this break. Bruce Hawker, Peter Reith, stay with us. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.